This call is being recorded.
All right, we're all ready to go. Rainbow and Claudia, please take it away.
Thank you, Christine, for the introductions. And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, the community call with Africa Voices Foundation and DataShift. My name is Claudia Lopes. I'm Head of Research and Innovation of Africa Voices Foundation.
And I'm Rainbow. I am the Impact and Communications Officer. So this webinar has come out from initially from the meeting in Bogota with that DataShift organised. So Africa's Voices was one of the organisations involved in DataShift's initial direct support phase. And during that meeting, where there are several very diverse organisations all interested in citizen-generated data, we talked a lot about the potential of that kind of data, but also the various challenges that we have faced in our own organisations. So yeah, we'd like to use this opportunity to share some of our own learnings around three particular challenges, as Kristen has already explained. So how to engage citizens, how to then analyse that data that's collected, and also the discussions and the questions we often have around the validity and the credibility of that data that we're collecting.
So Africa Voices work sits at the convergence of three different forces. So in the first place, there's an increasing recognition by development actors, for example, the World Bank. There's the World Bank reports from 2015 and 2016 of the social and cultural factors that explain human behavior. And we are talking about the role of mental models and collective beliefs and social norms to explain practices and behaviors and opinions and attitudes. And the second force is the opportunities of data revolution for monitoring and progressing the sustainable development goals. And finally, of how we can use technology more efficiently to bring citizen voices to the development discussions and decision making. So Africa Voices began as a research project at the University of Cambridge, and is now a research organization since the end of 2014. And since then, we have been growing as a team, both in Cambridge and in Nairobi, and we are working with various organizations to carry out innovative research. And there will be some examples later. And our connection with universities remains strong. Many of our current team members are graduates or researchers from the university. So we have an interdisciplinary team that combines people from researchers from African politics, social psychology, development studies, data and computer science, human and computer interaction, and theoretical and applied linguistics. And we have links to different departments in Cambridge. And this interdisciplinary nature of Africa Voices fosters innovation as we bring together ideas from different fields. So Africa Voices offers comprehensive and novel approaches to research and digital citizen engagement, from research through the implementation and from small scale to big data analysis. And through our methods for gathering and analyzing citizen-generated data, we enable development and governance organizations to listen closely to citizens living in African countries and understand their priorities, practices, and worldviews. And then these insights can shape program and policy design, implementation, and evaluation. So our aim is to help organizations to seize the data revolution, to monitor and progress towards the sustainable development goals.
So the first challenge that we're going to look at is how to engage citizens to generate that data that we're all interested in. So there's several different elements to that. The initial engagement, getting people's attention and interest, sustaining the engagement over time, engaging different populations, and also at the same time, try not to be purely extractive in the way that you gather that data. So from Africa's Voices pilot research and more recent projects, we've developed several principles and practices around how to engage citizens through digital channels. I'll just highlight a few of these here. So firstly, meeting people where they are. So we use local language interactive radio forums quite frequently, as well as social media forums. So these are already very popular and people are already engaging them in quite a dynamic way. Removing barriers to participation, particularly for us, that means always using a free SMS code, so it's no cost to the participant, and in local language forums, so languages that people are comfortable with. We also try to leverage intrinsic motivations, so people will often participate in a radio show because they like they like the recognition that comes from having their messages read on air. And also building engagement over time. It can take time to build in trust and enthusiasm around a particular forum. So we've learned that a series of radio shows will grow engagement over time.
So one of the examples that we have for you today is a case study, a pilot that we did with UNICEF Somalia last year. That is the project Way Radio, using radio and mobile phones to engage with Somali women and youth. So we collect collective beliefs, opinions, and practices of Somalis on routine immunizations and maternal and neonatal child health. And the model for our digital citizen engagement was combining radio with mobile phones. So there was a program that we designed with Somali media organization that is Media Inc., former Free Press Unlimited. And we designed a series of shows called Kalkal. Kalkal means health worker in Somali. And these shows were broadcasted across 20 different radio stations in South Central and Puntland, Somalia, for 8 weeks, one program per week. And per week. So during each program, there was one question that was posed to the audiences, would reply using a short code free through SMS, and the SMSs were received in the UNICEF platform called Rapid Pro, and the Africa Voices team had access to these messages in real time. And we did analysis of these messages, and we generate insights that will be useful for UNICEF, for them to do a vulnerability mapping of Somalia to understand in which regions, provinces, some of the problems were more common, and to help them also to bring some of these insights and these voices into their next development plans. So some of the characteristics that Rainbow talk about how we do engagement are very present here in this project. For example, we developed the content with UNICEF and with the media organization, and we have guests in each show. For example, depending on the topic, we would invite religious leaders or community leaders, doctors, UNICEF experts. And the messages were motivating. The radio scripts, they contain some health facts and some kind of educational messages. And the engagement was built along the series of 8 shows. There were also radio promos to advertise the shows in advance. And there was some radio messages just in the day of the show to let people know what time the show is going to take place. And the questions were repeated through the messages and through the radio shows. So the research design of this project is the most important feature, I would say, because that's how we can answer the questions that UNICEF wanted to understand. And there was 2 main questions. That the first question is, what is the difference between parents who vaccinated children and those who do not? So we start with some ideas that probably these differences between these 2 groups, people who vaccinate and not the children, are related to differences in the perceived risk of polio or perceived effectiveness of vaccination. So leading to the content of the radio shows that, for example, in the first case, we test the hypothesis that probably the perception of risk of polio were related with certain practices of vaccinated children. And we ask during the radio show the question, do you think that children in your community are at risk of polio? Yes and no, and why? So this binary format, yes and no, is the format that we found out through research that was the format that will be easier to understand and to reply, and also that fosters more discussion. And that's why we ask why. So people can take a position and then they can defend with their arguments. And then after the radio show, there was a SMS question that would ask about practices of vaccination. So we had some screening questions to know whether people are parents or not. And then for parents, we would ask, did your children receive polio vaccination? If they are not parents, we would ask, did you receive polio vaccination?
So the pilot project was very successful in terms of numbers of engagement. So we had over 19,000 messages from, there was actually over 8,000 people participated, but once we'd cleaned the data and processed it, it was 7,633 people who were actually involved in the subsequent analysis. We also sent SMS surveys to gather social demographics, and the response rates were quite high, demonstrating people were engaged in this forum, so between 70 and 80%. And also more than 70% of people participated several times during the pilot. And as this graph shows here, the participation increased over time, with the most participation in the 8th week, where that big spike is at the end, which shows again the importance of the way to sustain engagement is building it over time and building a forum and a space that people are kind of engaged in and attached to. And we also, the pilot was successful in terms of the breadth and the depth of voices we reached. So there were actually participants from every district of Somalia, and 44% of these participants were women, which is a great percentage considering that radio discussions are usually dominated by men. They're mostly quite a young demographics. 86% were under 30 years old, and it kind of rings true with the population in Somalia, which is a very young population. We uncovered several insights, which we can't really go into now, but they're all on our website if you'd like to read more. For example, the role of religion in people's health practices, as well as how the perception of risk of polio is very strongly linked to whether parents will vaccinate their children. And here is just a couple of feedback from the audience, a couple of quotes. Again, demonstrating one of the principles of how recognition is really important for engaging people. So the first one says how they like the chance to hear my own comments read on air, and the second one is about how they heard the voice of their neighbour. So these are spaces where people are hearing voices of people like them. And we, even after the show's finished in beginning of January, we realised quite recently that many people continue sending in messages for 4 months afterwards, just asking about what's happened to the show and when it will start again. And due to the success, we're actually doing 3 more series of the radio show with UNICEF, starting from this month. So the second challenge we're going to look at is, once you've engaged the citizens, you've gathered lots of data, and what do you do with it to make sure that it's, actually get some actionable insights from it? Analysis can be particularly difficult when it's conversational in nature and in local languages. This can be very messy data. It's something that at Africa's Voices, most of our data is like this. So when people are texting in, they all use slang, they'll use text speak, there'll be misspellings and different dialects. So now we'll explain a bit more about how Africa's Voices does that analysis and makes sense of the data. The diagram you can see here is an example of a data flow when we're doing an interactive radio project. So the data is generated by the citizens in the form of SMS, goes through several digital platforms. We download, analyse, store the data, and ultimately produce some deliverables in the form of reports, visualizations that reveal those insights. So Claudia will explain a bit more the analysis step.
Thank you, Rainbow. So I'm going to guide you through the different steps of the data analysis. So in our data analysis, we don't use only one technique. We use a combination of different types of approaches that are from data science, human knowledge, and social science. So the first step of the data analysis is having the data tool, the textual data. This is a message corpus. So this data was generated by a sets of questions, some of them that were broadcasted during radio shows, or if you're talking about social media forums, and SMS questions that it's more one-to-one communication. So our starting point is this message corpus that is very messy and structured with local language data, with dialects and misspellings. So the first step is to prepare this data so we can just analyze it using techniques that will generate some insights. So the first step is the pre-processing of data, is the process where we let's say, clean the data when we remove stop words that are words who don't add anything to the comprehension of the messages. And we remove, for example, special characters, punctuation. We identify seed words. Seed words are words that opposite of stop words, words with meaning that will tell us something about the opinions of people. And we identify and correct misspellings just to uniformize them. And we code SMS questions. The SMS questions, for example, asking parents whether they vaccinate or not their children or the gender, it doesn't come clean. So we need to do some initial automated analysis, so we can code automatically, but then we have to supplement it with some manual analysis. So it's a very laborious process. And the next stage is the message exploration. When we have all the data clean, let's say with the messages linked to SMS questions and with the demographics, we do it through an interface that we develop at Africa Voices. You can find an example in the next slide, the interface for exploring messages. And we do this with the native speakers who have some knowledge about the topic and a very good knowledge about language and slang, who can go through the different messages and start writing down some of the topics that people are talking about. And at the same time, we link these different topics to language, to a lexicon. So we start with some words, and then through semantic networks that are, our words are connected to other words in the messages, we start discovering new words and start building a list of words that will be a lexicon. So the third stage is a stage that is done by social researchers, that is a thematic analysis, doing manually. So after we have the information, let's say, digested into different topics, and we start organizing this information into different themes and different sub-themes. And for each sub-theme, we identify the lexicon that people use in the messages, including slang and dialects. So we are talking about, we have projects with different scales, but some of the projects we have 1 million messages, and other projects we have 300 messages. So for the big projects, we cannot do this system manually, that we identify all the themes and then we code each one of the messages into one of these themes. So for big projects, we have to get a subset of the messages, and we ask coders, researchers, to manually code the messages, and we ask 2-3 people, and then we have an index of the intercoder reliability. And after we have the subset of data, I call it data labeled, we use machine learning, a machine learning approach to code the remaining messages in the data. But we need to have enough data to use the machine learning technique. So I'm talking about maybe a cutoff of 10,000 messages. If you have 10,000 messages, we'll use like machine learning. And when the output of all this process is to have a data set that is clean, let's say that we have all the messages with all the misspellings uniformized and linked to coded information about gender, about age, about location, and about some questions that are related to the topic of the project. And all the data is labeled. So we know for each one of the messages what are the main topics that people are talking about. And we have the data in this format. We can upload the data onto, for example, we use Tableau for visual exploration, so we can use an interactive dashboard to, for example, understand what are the topics that people for certain demographics, for example, women 20-25 years old who live in a certain province of Somalia are talking about. So an example of an interactive dashboard is in the next slide. And there's also an example of annotated text messages using the thematic analysis by one of our researchers. After the visual exploration, the next step is the hypothesis testing. So we start this process of data analysis with some questions in mind. For example, in Somalia, what is the difference between people who vaccinate and not the children? And we need to test this using robust statistical techniques. And these are tailored to the different research questions. For example, in Somalia, we use regression, we use logistic regression. And after we answer these questions, the process doesn't stop, because then we need to translate these results, that some of them are very crude and more complex statistics, into a language that organizations would translate into decision making and into like actionable insights for their programs. And we found that a way to show them is just to talk about collective beliefs. So what people from different social groups, for example, how men and women talk differently about vaccination or about the transmission of polio. And we can then think about different types of collectives, that we can think about geographical areas, we can think about age groups. So there's an insight validation process that it's done with the researchers or practitioners of the organizations we are working with in terms of discussion of the results. And then we aggregate the results of the community level so that we can tell them something about these groups that they are interested in knowing more about. And this last step, we do it with qualitative techniques as well. We use a grounded theory to get the aggregation of beliefs. And finally, in terms of how we can show some credibility and some validity of our approach to engage citizens and to analyze data, I just list some of our main clues for validity. That the first one is that we are able to reach hard-to-reach voices. So depending on the groups that the client organizations are interested, we can reach voices and reach people who are hard to reach by traditional methods by choosing certain radio stations or digital platforms or certain the presenters that we know that through audience research that we will reach a certain group of people or community. The second one is the diverse participation. So we aim that during this, for example, radio discussions, the participants are diverse and heterogeneous. So we do it through our approach of engagement, that we value voices from, for example, women and from more minorities and voices that are more divergent. And so we are able to identify these collective opinions, ideas, and comparing different social groups and understand how they change over time. And then we have rich, meaningful data. So we have data into context. And this is what we value in our analysis at the expense of some statistical generalizations. So we have textual data. That means that we have like the opinions of people that are generated in a social context. And we analyze the full data of participants so we can have insights that are more than simple generalizations of a statistical to, for example, a national level. And we use robust methods for analysis, the cycle that I just described, that we combine human knowledge with data science and social sciences. And we generate social insights that are discussed with the client organizations and with the local experts. And we use triangulation of methods. So whenever possible and where is available, we combine our insights with the insights from, for example, surveys or from community scorecards. And we validate these findings at different processes, at different points in the process of data analysis, with native speakers or with experts, and with, for example, using focus groups discussions as well at the end of the analysis, just to validate some of these insights. So finally, we have some examples of organizations that we have been working. We have been working with Oxfam on Kenya with oil and gas extractive industries and community consultation, or with Welto Story also in Kenya, projects related to contraception, political participation, religious tolerance and violence, analyzing their digital platforms, the ChooJazz platform. And we have a project with Live It in Africa at the moment to gather young South African views of priorities and pressing youth issues for the next municipal elections in Africa. And we have projects here with the University of Cambridge. And for example, a project that we did last year on maternal health, that was a collaboration with the Makerere University in Uganda.